This episode is produced as part of a series of videos called Christianity Explained by an Atheist. This episode, Who was the Apostle Simon? Part 2. Hi, I'm Raspasha. In the first part of this episode, we found that the Apostle Simon was also known as Simon Magus, and that Simon Magus was worshipped as God according to Justin Martyr. In this episode, we'll look at Simon's Hellenistic name, more evidence that he was worshipped as God, and we'll stumble across a squabble between Peter and Paul on a central doctrine of Christianity. Luke Acts 8.9 to 11 reads, "But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used sorcery, and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that he himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed, from the least to the greatest, saying, This man is the great power of God, and to him they had regard, because that of long time he had bewitched them with sorceries." The gulf between the early Christians and the Gnostics was often not that large. The Gnostics wanted to make the same reform as the early Christians. Wikipedia states, the law, according to him, Simon Magus, was not of God, but of the sinister power. The same was the case with the prophets, and it was death to believe in the Old Testament. Here we can see that Simon was at one with the reforms of both Jesus and Paul with respect to the abolition of the law. The Christians removed the sanctity of the law and also concurred that death is synonymous with spiritual death, which calls the belief in false doctrines death. It would be futile to maintain that the passage displayed is not aimed at Paul. The passage comes from a letter from Peter to James, which is used as the prefix to the Clementine homilies. Peter writes, "For some of the converts from the Gentiles have rejected the preaching through me in accordance with the law." Well, we know that Paul was a Roman Gentile convert. It goes on to say, having accepted a certain lawless and babbling doctrine of the enemy. Well, we've just seen that the description of the enemy fits Simon Magus. We also know that Paul advocated the abolition of the law. It's clearly an attempt to group Paul with Simon Magus. Peter goes on, "And this some people have attempted, while I am still alive, by various interpretations to transform my words under the overthrow of the law, as though I also thought thus, but did not preach it openly, which be far from me, for to do so is to act against the law of God as spoken through Moses, the eternal duration of which is borne witness to by our Lord. Since he said thus, Heaven and earth shall pass away, one jot or one tittle shall not pass away from the law. Now this he said that all might be fulfilled." Whilst Peter accuses Paul of transforming his words, Peter is attempting to solicit Jesus to his side of the argument by quoting a passage from Jesus that Jesus probably no longer holds. So Peter is engaging in the same type of thing that he is accusing Paul of having done. For Simon Magus to be close enough to the early Christians for Peter to attempt to paint Paul as being in the same camp, it gives us good reason to draw the link between the Magi leader Simon and the former apostle Simon. The importance of the link between Jesus' family and the Magi is shown when Joseph, called the star, leads the Magian leaders to witness his son and heir, Jesus. Matt 2.1 and 2 states, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came Magi from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star," that's Joseph, "in the east, and are come to worship him." This link goes further back when the Herodian mission was first set up. Jesus' grandfather Heli was made the new Jacob, whilst Menahem, a priest from Samaria, was made the new Isaac. The Magians, being a name for the religious group in Samaria, but associated with the Essenes, Herod looked favourably upon Menahem, because when Herod was a child, Menahem had predicted that Herod would become king. In the following, Simon gives the imagery of the root as being the foundation of the Simonians. It states, "This is the writing of the revelation of voice, and name from thought, the great power, the boundless. Wherefore shall it be sealed, hidden, concealed, laid in the dwelling, of which the universal root is the foundation." So when Jesus laid the axe to the root of the tree, he was removing the Zealots from the Essenes, but we also see that the Zealots were the Simonians. Matt 3:10 reads, "And now also the axe is laid unto the root of the tree. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down, and cast into the fire." Alternatively, we could have said that Jesus was removing the fig tree from the vineyard. The Gnostics placed significance in Pythagorean numbers. John 21:11 reads, "Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153, and for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken." This bit of text is particularly funny. Jesus has just turned up after supposedly rising from the dead, and one of his disciples has to stay and count the stinking fish. However, the number 153 is one of the Pythagorean numbers. The divide between Orthodox Christians and the Gnostics is not as large as we would think. Next up, Lazarus the leper. In Luke 16:19-31, Lazarus is identified as a leper, indicating that he was a zealot. Remember that Simon is also called a leper. Furthermore, Lazarus is said to be poor, meaning that he'd given up his personal wealth to the Essene community of the poor. A person with leprosy at that time was segregated from society and not allowed any normal social intercourse. But in the Gospels, Lazarus is depicted in a social setting. This gives support for the conclusion that the leprosy is that of being a zealot and not a disease. Apart from both Lazarus and Simon being said to be lepers, they both reside in Bethany. This gives reason to suspect that Simon and Lazarus are the one person. Conclusion. Peter and Paul did not always agree on theology, so we can understand why Christians are confused to this day. The Apostle Simon was also called Simon Magus, and he was worshipped as a god. We suspect that Lazarus is Simon's Hellenistic name. There were traditional ties between the Davids and the Magians, but by laying the axe to the root of the tree, Jesus effectively severed those ties. The Zealots were referred to as various Essene afflictions, such as the blind or lepers. Large doctrinal differences resulted in excommunication, called spiritual death.